Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim. Today, we're going to continue our series on aid for Ukrainian refugees that is provided out of Poland with a special guest, Jonathan Ornstein, Executive Director of the JCC Krakow. Jonathan, it's so wonderful to have you here, and thank you so much for sharing some of your experience with us. And you're coming from the city of Krakow and from your organization, right, through this wonderful technology that we have today.
Absolutely. I'm here in Krakow. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to talk a little bit about our work here supporting Ukraine.
And it's so interesting what you are doing. Could you describe the scale of your organization and the scale of a JCC in Krakow? You know, Krakow had this vital Jewish community before the Second World War, and much of Poland's Jewish population was destroyed during the Holocaust. Talk a little bit about the development of the JCC Krakow, and in particular, Jewry throughout the nation of Poland, where so many people were just wiped out.
Yeah, well, Poland was, as you said, Poland was an overwhelmingly Jewish place before the war. There were 3.1 million or 3.5 million Jews living in Poland. About 10% of the population was Jewish, and 90% of the Jews were murdered in the Holocaust. And usually for us in the Jewish world, that's the end of the story. We understand there were survivors. We know they left Poland and went to the United States, to Palestine, which then became Israel, to South America, wherever they could go, anywhere in Europe. And we usually don't think about Poland in the Jewish context beyond 1945, but not all the survivors left Poland. Some did stay. And then during communism, during the 45 years of communism, there was anti-Semitism here once again. And the survivors who stayed, essentially went underground. So there was really no Jewish life by the end of communism, not too much. And in the last 32 years now, something quite remarkable has been happening, which is young Poles are finding out that they actually have Jewish roots. People finding out from their grandparents, finding photos of people with beards, finding letters or documents, going online at ancestry.com and things like this. My wife herself, I met my wife who grew up without knowing she was Jewish, and came and found out, and then came to the JCC after finding out that she was Jewish. So our center's been open for 14 years, and we're dedicated to, one, taking care of our Holocaust survivors. We have over 50 Holocaust survivors, Polish survivors that stayed, that never left, and we're taking care of them, and really looking toward the future of trying to rebuild Jewish life, trying to reach out to all of these young Poles, especially young people who have recently and are just still finding out that they have some Jewish roots, and to try to encourage them to connect to their heritage and welcome them back into the fold.
And that isn't unusual in our history, right? During the Spanish Inquisition, we had Jews going underground and generations later finding out that they're Jewish. If you take a look at Madeleine Albright, finding out as an adult that she was Jewish, or Cardinal Lustiga. Cardinal Lustiga, also called the Jewish Cardinal of the Catholic Church. A family friend of ours, Arno Lustiga, his brother, he was the one who, with his brother, found out that they both actually existed. He had been adopted by a Catholic family, and was about to take his vows when he discovered it. And the Catholic priest that was bringing him through that process said, "Hold on, do not take your vows. Think about it for a year," before he did. And he thought about it. He took his vows. He became ultimately a cardinal, but he found out very late in life that he was Jewish. So this kind of rediscovery of tradition, and being able to evolve an organization like yours in support of the community is quite extraordinary. Before we get on to what you're doing with the refugees and the displaced, could you talk a little bit about the organization, its founding, the date of the JCC's founding, and then sort of give us a 30-foot view of your operations there. And then we're going to talk a little bit about your philanthropic work on behalf of refugees.
Sure. So we actually have an interesting founding story. We were founded by Prince Charles, the Prince of Wales, who visited Krakow in 2002 and met with some Holocaust survivors, and he was very moved by their histories, first surviving the Holocaust and then essentially outlasting communism. And he asked what they needed. And they said, we have all these synagogues. Krakow is home to 7 renovated pre-war synagogues, but they said, we have a place to pray, but we don't have a place to be together, like a senior citizen center. And Prince Charles said he was going to help them realize their dream. And he got involved with an organization in the UK called World Jewish Relief, which was the organizer of the Kindertransport during World War II. And they took a look at Krakow, and they realized that it wasn't only this older population that the prince had connected with, that there were young people who beginning, as we've been talking about, to find out about their Jewish roots. So they went back to the prince with a counter proposal saying, we'd love to do this project for the survivors, but let's do something even bigger, like a JCC, and help to flush out this community and develop this community and give it help give it a future. Prince Charles said, okay, gave some money. And then with his involvement, they were able to open the JCC in 2008. He was in attendance, as was the Duchess of Cornwall, Camilla. So we've been open for 14 years. Generally, our operation is a small but growing operation. I think before February 24th, before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we were about 30 full-time employees, another 20 or so part-time, and then what's really interesting, 70 non-Jewish volunteers. So this idea of Jews and non-Jews working together is a big part of our ethos here. We are a community of firsts. We opened a preschool, which is the first Jewish community preschool to open in Krakow since the Holocaust. We have a Sunday school, BBYO and Hillel youth organizations are being run through our JCC. I mentioned we're taking care of Holocaust survivors. We have Shabbat dinner every week. We publish a newspaper. We have a choir. We have a genealogist. We have a few hundred people studying Hebrew. We have Arabic class. We have Yiddish class. So really, if you look at it, it's a small but growing community, and almost everything going on in our community is being run through our JCC. So that includes direct financial aid to needy families, to Holocaust survivors. So we're wearing a lot of hats. There's no federation here like we have in the US, the federation system, or Jewish Family Services. We're called a JCC, but I think we're really a JCC plus.
And one of the things that I think is so very interesting is that your existence, the fact that you're doing what you're doing, the fact that you're making friends, the fact that you're providing services, it's kind of if you're going to survive, you have to make sure that the Nazis don't win, right? And existence is part of that, and then service is another part of it. And we have this other situation in which we have a neighboring country to Poland, again being invaded. In that particular case, in the Second World War, it was Poland being invaded. How do people in Poland view this situation in Ukraine in the context of their history? You're probably best positioned to do this, given the fact that you're right in the center of this historic city, and you're talking with people every day. What is the perceptions there? And I'm sure that there's not just one, right? That there are multiple dialogues happening. So could you unpack that for us?
I mean, I think in the first place, Poles are very mindful of where they are geographically in Europe. And Poland is in a very difficult place in Europe, and really not where you want to be historically, which is between Germany and Russia. And they have very bad memories of Germany invading on September 1st and Soviet Union invading on September 17th. So while we as Jews are focused primarily on the Nazis, other countries in this part of the world were really got it from both sides. And the Nazis might be worse than the Soviets, but not by much. So when this all happened, I think Poland, in some ways, we were all surprised that Russia actually invaded. Although forces were massed at the Ukrainian border, building up to the invasion. But Poles weren't surprised that Russia did this. Poles weren't surprised by Putin, because Polish history is always having this aggressive Eastern neighbor who either, for over 100 years of Polish history had taken a part of Poland. Poland, we should remember that Poland was partitioned, and until World War I for 125 years was off the map. So this is, it's not surprising here, and Poles are wary of Putin, and this government especially has been for years very anti-Putin. So I think that this has also informed the response to say, that Poles are mindful that we could be next.
And what you're basically saying is that the Poles don't want to have an armed Russia on their border. That's what you're basically saying, is that part of this response is basically saying the Russians have to be stopped as far away from our borders as possible because we're next.
Absolutely. So
you told us that we're next, right?
Yeah, no, you've heard different Russian officials in the last few weeks have said it pretty openly that the next country that needs this, denazification, as they call it, is Poland.
Yeah, it's and so also it also places within context the support that you're receiving, right? If you take a look at Poles as being different religions, right? Catholic primarily, and then this nascent Jewish community. The communities that have an experience that are against this type of invasion, whether from the German side or from the Russian side, suddenly become very natural allies. So that might also be a vehicle toward healing. Do you see it as such?
Yeah, I mean, I think the healing process in many ways has been going on for a long time in this part of the world, certainly since communism ended. In places where, in countries which weren't under the Soviet sphere of influence to the west of here, I think the healing was able to start right away after World War II. But in places like Poland, the healing wasn't able to go on, and countries, inside the, behind the Iron Curtain, because it wasn't in the Soviet Union's interest for any real discussion about what happened during World War II, and any discussion of who was victimized was, beyond just the fascists were victimizing everybody. So we're a little. The healing process here is a younger healing process than it is in places like West Germany, which was forced to deal with things right after the war. But yeah, for 32 years, there has been healing going on in Poland, which is a very Catholic country. A lot of the healing has been helped and facilitated by the work that John Paul II did here, being the Pope, being such a towering figure in Poland. He's like the Mandela of Poland in the way that he's seen here.
Years, right? And he always held this center place.
Yes.
People talk about his activism, but in many respects, he was the Mandela who did not attack as he might have. Instead, he tried to create a healing balm across very, very deep wounds.
Yeah, no, and the Catholic Church, the relations with the Catholic Church are very warm, not even good, but beyond just cordial and very warm, and we understand that in Poland, and this is a strange thing to say because throughout Jewish history, the Catholic Church has really not been a friend and has been in many ways the motor of anti-Semitism for a couple of thousand years. But we really have a partner in what we're doing here in Poland, and whether that's helping to fight against anti-Semitism or supporting these people seeking their Jewish roots, the Catholic Church, and this is directly because of the work of John Paul II, is a partner, a strong partner here.
And so let's turn a little bit to helping other largely Catholics coming in as refugees, but also people of different races who were in Ukraine and have been replaced, people from Africa. You have also a very important program to help people who would be rejected by mainstream Polish society, from the LGBTQ plus community. Could you talk a little bit about the range of support that you provide for those who are displaced? It's a very familiar experience in Jews who found themselves refugees, in waves. So now you are, having come back, you are now helping others who are refugees who are not necessarily Jewish. Talk a little bit about what you're doing and how you're doing it.
when the war started, we made a couple decisions which have guided us for these past 3 months. The first one was that we were going to do all we could as an institution, not do what was comfortable, but to fully focus and do all we could. And to that end, we've doubled our organization in size. So we've hired, I think, 25 full-time people to focus on Ukraine, and we've actually doubled the size of the institution. So one was to do
From what date to what date did you double in size?
within a month or so.
You
So
doubled
we
in size
added,
within a month.
yes,
That's
doubled it
incredible.
within a month. That was the first decision. And the second one was that we were going to help Jews and non-Jews equally. So this was not only help Jews and non-Jews, not to build a mechanism to help Jews and then also help some non-Jews along the way, but to fully focus on helping everybody we could. And you mentioned the LGBTQ plus community and non-white communities we also understood that if people were in more, had more need, then we were going to focus on them more and make sure that the people that were not being helped by others would be supported. We also have a program to help the Roma community, which refugees left Ukraine who are just disadvantaged wherever they are. So for us, this was the bit we understood. We mindful of the fact that we, as we've been talking about, were a community that was decimated during the Holocaust, and essentially decimated because most of the world stood silent when we were being victimized. So we are the community in Krakow, which is an hour's drive from Auschwitz. And as the community down the road from Auschwitz, I hope I hope that if no one else has learned the lesson of the Holocaust, and of course many have, then I hope the community down the road from Auschwitz certainly has learned the lesson and internalized this, that we cannot be silent when others are being victimized. And that's been our mantra since February 24th, to absolutely do everything we can to serve all the Ukrainians that we can.
And you can make common cause with people who believe that it is not the ritual, it's not the specifics of belief, but it is the human family that requires support and service, right? It's the washing of the feet, right? In which you are expressing your own idea of service simply by serving, right? And that's where you can come together. That's where the Catholic Church and Jewish synagogues and Jewish communities can come together and just say, these are people in need, let us help. And it comes out of the heart of each of the traditions, and both traditions equally, if we turn our minds in that way. So you doubled your organization. Could you just deconstruct some of the programs that you provide? There are all sorts of different services that you provide. And let's also then talk about how you're funded, because that's an important part. You can't double an organization unless you have the resources to do it.
No question. So the first thing we set up was a food distribution point: foods, clothing, sanitary items, hygienic supplies, toys, even pet food. That people started to bring us donations, then we started to buy things, and we started to raise more money. And our center is open 7 days a week. We have about 600 Ukrainian, it's almost all women and children, who are coming into our building every day and taking for free whatever they need. So food is one large need. We saw in the beginning how that's changed. In the beginning, somebody forgot a toothbrush, or it was cold in February, they needed a sweater. But now we see that it's primarily about food. So people are hungry and people need food. So that's become really the biggest part of what we're distributing here. Is every day, twice a day, we have food shipments that come in that we're buying, and people are taking up to 600 people a day are coming in to take that. But the largest and the most pressing need for us is housing. There are about 150,000 refugees in Krakow, in a city of 750,000, and the city itself is able to house about 10,000, right? So about 6 to 7% are being housed by the city, and the rest by individuals who've been amazing, and NGOs like us. So on any given night, we have about 400 people that we're housing in hotel rooms. We have about 150 hotel rooms that we're paying for, and as well as a few other apartments and one large facility outside of town that has about 85 people to 100 people, Ukrainians, every night. So housing is big. Housing and food are the two biggest needs. After that, it's psychological support. These people have gone through absolute, the absolute hell, many of them in Ukraine, especially ones that saw fighting, victims of sexual violence, people that are all separated from their families. It's a particularly vulnerable population because it's only women and children primarily. So that's been a big focus for us. We've set up a safe space for women and children, daycare, psychological support, as I've mentioned, legal counseling to help people with immigration and other issues that they have. I think 15 or 16 separate programs that we're working both on our own and with partners to be able to do what we can and to help these Ukrainians.
And this is something that we all need to appreciate. Poland's population has exploded by a little bit less than 10% overnight, right, but it's concentrated in the major cities. So Warsaw, right, Krakow, some of the other cities are seeing increases in population of 20%. You just cited a statistic, right? There's 750,000 people in Greater Krakow, and you have 150,000 refugees. That's 20% population increase.
Right.
Where do you put all, and then how do you feed them? And then how do you ensure that we don't have the blowback of negativity that can come from having refugees in your space for a long time? If I open my home and my heart after a certain period of time, 3 months, 6 months, it becomes very, very wearing, and my resources are limited, and perhaps my philanthropic feelings shift. What are you seeing in that respect?
We're starting to see that. So people here, we should be mindful. We're talking about a city. People have apartments or small houses. We're not talking about, lavish estates that people can host many people. We have a community member who's a single mom who has a 3-bedroom house, and she was hosting 23 Ukrainians at the high point. So this is something that's this is the situation that we see. But yes, you're right. There are limited resources. People are not very wealthy here in Poland. It's not an exceptionally poor country, but it's not a rich Western country. Canada, the US, the UK, we're not in that category. So it's difficult, and people are starting to feel that, and we're mindful of the fact that the needs are growing. Although there aren't that many new Ukrainians coming in, the numbers are stabilized or even a little bit going in the other direction. But the people that are here are in greater need and have been here for months and do not want to move to the West. These are women and children who want to be united with their families, and they want to go back to Ukraine. And we just need to keep them housed and fed and give them the support that we can. And you asked about funding. We've been, this is all of our efforts are being funded by donations, mostly in the United States, but also in the UK and around the world. We've received over 3,000 individual donations to our organization in the US. We have a US-based Friends of organization. Friends of JCC Krakow.org is the website. And we've set up a link there where people can make tax-deductible donations. We've raised almost $4 million for what we're doing, and need to raise probably 2.5 to 3 million more.
And that's going directly to people in need. So as you look at this situation, how do you see it developing, and what is the view in Poland about the patience of an autocrat versus the ability to sustain consensus of democracies? Do you think that Putin has made a good bet in that he can be more patient and outwait democracies like Poland? You think that there will be a shift that will require of the Ukrainians a compromise, simply because the Ukrainians are so reliant on the West for treasure, for the ability to continue the struggle? How do you see it?
I think that's what common knowledge would tell us, but I don't think that's what we're seeing here, especially that we saw the EU now to vote to severely limit the import of Russian oil, which is the major source of income for Russia, of course, and really keeping the Russian war machine going. So no, I don't think we're seeing that. I think the timing of it, the winter will be the scary part for us. So I think that if it starts to get to October, November, December, then that's where we're really in trouble. It seems like war with Russia, as we saw 80 years ago is very dependent on timing. And this part of the world gets very, very cold, and the needs, fuel needs, things like that, electricity needs go up, and that will certainly affect things. But no, I think that we're seeing the European Union united in a way that it never has been. Poland being connected and feeling part of Europe in a way that this government has really been pushing it in the other direction. And we now see that everybody in Europe, including previously neutral countries, suddenly, everybody understands the value of the European Union, of NATO, and of being together. And in this case, so far, the dictator is not dictating the terms, and I think that the world will continue to stay united. I think in Poland we don't feel that anything is fraying.
So the rational strategy of Putin would be to create as much refugee pressure as possible, to last throughout the summer, wait until it gets cold, where the pressure on Europe and on Poland will be higher, drive more refugees toward the west, create higher resentment. So in a sense, the battlefield strategy is really almost a human emotion strategy
Of course.
Of trying to deal with that. So
Right.
when
He's not doing that, but it's interesting because there are things that he could do. It would be very easy to send a few missiles into the center of Odessa, which would then, or other cities that haven't been that affected, which would then precipitate a refugee crisis from those cities. So, anything we think of, they've already thought of, but yet they're not doing that. And I guess there's a feeling that the West can still increase their sanctions, so that whatever sort of.
Well, I also think that Putin would have a real difficult time being viewed as destroying Slavic culture, which Odessa kind of encompasses. There's this place that Odessa has, and so he's okay destroying a place like Mariupol, but not necessarily a place of Slavic cultural significance. I think that's also one of the things that protected, funnily enough, Krakow Kiev to a certain extent. Because Kyiv also has this connection. Let me just get back to this whole idea of resource flowing from overseas, because we're coming to the end of our time. When resources come to you, to what extent does that go directly to refugee families, for example, or to certain designated purposes? Or are you just basically receiving your resources in a chunk, and you're just doing your best to supply needs on a day-to-day basis? How does that work?
It depends. We receive some targeted funding. So people say they want for specific programs to pay for psychologists, to buy food, for housing. We receive in some, and then in some we also just receive money that we're able to use to as we see fit. So in both, and we also provide, but in a limited way, direct financial support to the Ukrainians, cash support. But for the most part, most of the money our largest costs are housing and then food by far.
Well, if we look at the world as becoming more fractured along political lines, along lines of value and so on, and we look at this as part of the fracturing of the world, what do you see the role of your organization in a larger sense about trying to heal those fractures? Do you see yourself as an organization that is dedicated to healing, advancing particular Jewish culture or knowledge of particular Jewish culture? Is it about refugees? What is your central purpose that gets articulated in these various ways, or do you have one?
I think that the central purpose of our organization is to provide hope, and for that hope to manifest itself in terms of support. So if we think about a community that's been decimated the way that ours has, and yet is not closed off to others and is still growing, and is Jews and non-Jews working together to rebuild Jewish life down the road from Auschwitz, then I think there's a powerful message there that no community can ever be written off. that this community, would have every reason to not trust the other and to not work well with non-Jews. Yet that's very much who we are. And I think that the way that the Jewish community next to Auschwitz behaves has resonance beyond where we are here. And I think especially at a time of increased anti-Semitism in the world, the idea of our community doing well and thriving, I think, reminds those who would do us harm. It reminds them of the strength and resilience of the Jewish spirit. But I think more importantly, it reminds us. We grow up in a world where we take anti-Semitism as a given. And the fact that our community is not defined by anti-Semitism. We say that we here are not Jewish because of Auschwitz, we're Jewish despite Auschwitz. That what defines us is not what was done to us, but what defines us is our response. And our response is to rebuild. And now during this new crisis with Ukraine, our response is to do the exact opposite of what happened 80 years ago when the world was silent. So we stand up unified as one voice and support these victims today.
May the seed of hope that is being planted by you and your organization at JCC Krakow sprout into a beautiful flowering of culture, of community, of peace, and of a strong civil society. Stay strong in that effort. You have our admiration, support. Jonathan Ornstein, Executive Director of JCC Krakow. Thank you so much for sharing the work that you're doing. It is so incredibly valuable to us, and we will try to continue to galvanize support for your organization and your efforts, which are our efforts. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everybody.
Stay safe.